The emergency session opened under cold amber light, with a chamber of 12,000 arranged in concentric rings so every species could look down on every other species and pretend it was equality. Ambassador Elena Volkov stood at the human lectern on the lowest diplomatic tier, one palm flat against polished black stone, while above her, the Nexari delegation occupied an elevated crescent designed for psychic resonance amplification. Their choice of architecture was never subtle. For 3 centuries, the Nexari oligarchy had controlled legal transit through half the mapped hyperlane network by hoarding the Iridian convergence equation, and every trade block, refugee corridor, military escort, and relief convoy in known space paid for that monopoly in tariff chains disguised as licensing fees. High Commander Corey leaned forward in his cradle throne, thin silver sensory filaments coiled behind his skull like ceremonial wire. His pupils carried the Nexari hallmark shimmer of active link state, meaning he was not speaking as one official, but as the front end of an elite mind cluster. When he addressed the chamber, his voice arrived through acoustic channels and translation lattice both, careful theater for species he considered beneath direct thought. The matter before this council is not legal ambiguity, nor moral dispute. It is competency. Interstellar stability depends on mathematics that only true minds can perceive. The Nexari alone maintain that burden. You purchase our passage rights because you cannot generate them. That is the natural order. Dozens of delegates remained silent. Silence in the chamber was rarely agreement. It was debt, fear, and route dependence measured in pause lengths. Corey's gaze moved to the human platform with open disdain. And now, he continued, the Terran Union requests equal standing in convergence governance despite being signal-deaf animals. A species without telepathic faculty presumes to speak on tensors requiring true minds. You have brought an observer juvenile as if this were a classroom demonstration. Shall we ask the child to annotate non-linear collapse terms for us? Several Nexari attendants emitted a coordinated clicking laugh through their translator implants, the exact rhythm of social humiliation. Elena did not look up immediately. She reviewed the same data she had reviewed for 11 nights. Nexari gate, throttling patterns, inflation corridors in transit futures, embargo spikes applied to species that voted against Nexari mandates, and the predictable humanitarian shock after each so-called technical outage. Their power had never depended on the equation alone. It depended on everyone believing the equation was mystical property rather than solvable structure. She finally raised her eyes and met Corey's stare without visible strain. Behind Elena, 12-year-old Leora Hayes sat in the observer bench allocated to human junior analysts, dark hair tied back, station tablet balanced on her knees. She wore the simple slate jacket of Civilian Academy Exchange. No insignia except a plain brass pin representing Earth's old orbital ring. A Keth avian delegate to Elena's left looked once at the girl, then away, with the expression of someone calculating collateral damage in advance. Bringing Leora had already become an insult in council gossip channels, which was exactly why Elena had insisted. Corey extended his speech for the record, broad and formal, and the chamber lights shifted to the red-amber mode used for doctrinal declarations. For generations, he said, we have preserved the Iridian solution against misuse by less disciplined cultures. We have prevented cascade strand collapse, piracy swarms, and crude route vandalism by species lacking cognitive coherence. In return, we exact lawful tariffs, inspection rights, and corrective access restrictions where political instability threatens network integrity. This is stewardship, not domination. Those who call it coercion merely resent standards they cannot meet. Every sentence carried a legal hook. Every legal hook mapped to a sanction threat. It was a masterclass in predation, wearing institutional language. The Merchants of Pax delegated speaker requested floor recognition and was denied on procedural grounds by the Nexari presiding clerk, who cited emergency authority under convergence security law, a law drafted by Nexari jurists and ratified during a famine year when transport access had been contingent on approval. Two Lum scholar delegates exchanged a narrow look that would have escaped a less attentive room. Their species had spent 80 years trying to close the equation through non-telepathic methods. Their final petition for open collaboration had been blocked by the same authority, now declaring humanity unfit to comment. Corey let the denial settle before returning to Elena. "Withdraw this performance," he said, this time with less ceremonial polish and more direct contempt. "You are newly admitted, territorially minor, and mathematically juvenile. You have no standing to challenge convergence doctrine. Your fleets cannot patrol what your minds cannot understand. You will continue purchasing Nexari guidance, and you will refrain from inciting dependent systems with fantasies of free passage." The insult to humans was expected. The line about dependent systems was for the rest of the chamber. Corey wanted fear refreshed in real time. Leora's fingers moved once across her tablet screen, then stopped. She did not react to the laughter, and that made several nearby delegates watch her more carefully than they watched Corey. Human children were supposed to be shielded from statecraft by council custom. Elena had petitioned a waiver under Educational Observer Protocol, perfectly legal and strategically provocative, and every procedural clerk in the building knew it. The Nexari had accepted the waiver because they assumed it would discredit the Terran delegation. Instead, it forced the chamber to witness exactly what Corey wanted to erase: non-telepathic composure under targeted humiliation. When the speaking clock returned to human allocation, Elena's tone remained calm enough to make the Nexari amplification halo seem theatrical by contrast. The Terran Union recognizes the Iridian convergence equation as foundational infrastructure, not proprietary sovereign weaponry. We reject tariff slavery enforced through selective route shutdowns. We reject coercive licensing tied to political compliance. We reject the claim that cognition is valid only when psychic. The record should note that the Nexari delegation has declined transparent peer review for 307 standard years while extracting compulsory payment from signatory systems. Corey interrupted with a sharp downward motion of his hand. "The record will note your ignorance." "The record," Elena replied, "will note your refusal." There was no shouting. In the chamber, controlled cadence could wound more deeply than volume. 3 tiers above, a Thel Guardian delegate sent a private burst through diplomatic sideband to Elena's console. Human text rendering translated it into plain script. "If this breaks today, our border hospitals run out of antibiotics in 9 days." Elena acknowledged receipt without changing expression. That message, and 50 like it from smaller polities, was the real agenda. The equation was a theorem, but the monopoly was oxygen. When recess finally struck, the chamber dissolved into whispering clusters and encrypted crosslinks. Nexari officers remained in perfect formation, their confidence visible even in stillness. They had reasons for that confidence. Their battle doctrine, built on linked intent and predictive telepathic screening, had outmaneuvered conventional fleets for generations. Their regulators sat inside every major gate authority. Their financiers owned transit debt across 37 systems. Their propaganda channels had spent decades defining intelligence itself as resonance compliance. In that frame, humanity looked like a procedural irritant with no leverage and no right to speak. In the human delegation suite, 2 corridors down, the posture changed from diplomatic stillness to operational rhythm. Admiral Marcus Anderson filled the main wall display from Earth Defense Command, uniform collar open, silver at his temples and a background of floating fleet overlays behind him. He listened to Elena's summary without interruption, then asked only one question. Did Corey commit the doctrine line on open feed? He gave us all of it, Elena said. Stewardship narrative, competency hierarchy, corrective restrictions. He called us signal-deaf animals in full session. Marcus exhaled once, neither surprised nor pleased. Good. We needed the language uncontested. At the side table, Trade Marshal Nia Becker and Systems Analyst Joseph Larson worked through cascading projections as fast as the feed updated. Becker handled sanctions matrices and shipping resilience. Larson modeled gate outage scenarios against hidden relay architecture that had never been disclosed to the Council registry. Their screens flashed route maps, with dark corridors highlighted in soft blue, logistics bones laid under the visible skeleton of legal traffic. Humanity had spent years preparing for exactly this conversation, while pretending to be merely diligent newcomers learning procedure. Leora sat with her legs tucked under the chair, silent until Marcus addressed her directly. Did he reveal anything useful? She turned her tablet and expanded a handwritten tensor block beside a cleaned transcript of Corey's speech. He used the phrase, true minds in relation to collapse handling, then linked that to stewardship thresholds. That implies their model still hard codes the psychic constant as a stability requirement. It also means they probably trained on telepathic traffic distributions and mistook sampling bias for universal structure. She glanced up at Elena for confirmation before continuing. If the bias term is exposed publicly, their licensing argument fails even before the full closure proof. No one in the room spoke for 2 seconds. Not because the idea was new, because she had compressed 3 months of technical review into 6 plain sentences. Marcus gave a single nod. Keep working the variance branch. No external transmission yet. Leora returned to her equations with the absorbed focus of someone building a bridge, while adults argued about who owned the river. Elena moved to the secure window, where the council spire rose over the station like a blade of dark glass against Starfield. She could see Nexari escort craft drifting in disciplined diamonds near the upper docking ring, visible reminder that diplomacy sat under guns, whether anyone admitted it or not. In 40 hours, Corey would either retreat behind legal ambiguity or escalate to force. Her staff expected escalation. So did she. What are they missing? Becker asked quietly, eyes still on her sanctions board. Elena answered without turning. They think predictability is weakness. They think restraint is incapacity. They think if they define mind narrowly enough, everyone else consents to being ruled. Marcus's voice came through the wall speakers, lower now, command channel stripped of ceremony. Then we proceed exactly as briefed. Final warning at full formality. 72 standard hours. If they restore free passage and submit independent review, we de-escalate. If they do not, we execute the first package. Economic first, corridor control second, fleet posture third. Larson looked up. And the proof? Elena finally turned back to the room and to the child still writing at the end of the table. If they keep using knowledge as a weapon, she said, we remove the weapon. Outside, station bells marked the end of recess, and the delegates began filing back toward the chamber where power dressed itself as law and expected obedience by habit. The human team rose together, professional, unspectacular, and entirely finished with being underestimated. The chamber doors sealed with a pressure thud that carried through the tiered rings and the amber lights narrowed into the speaking cone above the central floor. Elena returned to the lectern while the station clock projected in pale numerals across the ceiling. Emergency authority session resumed, quorum intact. Corey did not sit this time. He stood in his crescent dais with the linked Nexari cluster behind him, like a mirror made of living metal and bone, every posture synchronized to the millimeter. The presiding clerk invited final technical statements on convergence governance. Corey answered first, because Nexari procedure had always interpreted emergency order as right of first contempt. For 307 standard years, he declared, his translator carrying a velvet calm sharpened by disdain, the Nexari custodial mind has carried burdens lesser species cannot fathom. We prevented lane collapse where your erratic simulations predicted stability. We suppressed piracy vectors while your councils debated paperwork. We rationed passage when undisciplined populations threatened network fracture. We tolerated your petitions, your accusations, and your ignorance because stable transit served even those too primitive to deserve it. But this theater ends now. Humanity will retract its challenge, reaffirm Nexari licensing authority, and remove the juvenile prop from this chamber, or we will enact corrective restrictions under convergence security law across every corridor touching your trade volume. The sentence landed exactly where he intended, on frightened delegates who measured food imports in days, not principles. Elena keyed her console for formal response priority and waited while the clerk pretended to review permissions already decided by legal protocol. Her voice emerged clean, unhurried, and loud enough to strip theatrics from the room. On behalf of the Terran Union and co-signatory petitioners, I enter a final notice into the permanent record. The Iridian convergence equation is infrastructure mathematics, not sovereign property. Effective immediately, the Nexari oligarchy has 72 standard hours to restore unrestricted civilian passage to all signatory systems, reopen suspended neutral gates, and submit convergence methodology to independent peer audit. Failure to comply will trigger synchronized trade sanctions, corridor interdiction against coercive assets, and open publication of a verifiable non-proprietary solution. She paused once, just long enough for the translators to clear every language channel. If you continue to wield knowledge as a weapon, she said, we will classify your monopoly as active aggression. There was no shouting, but half the chamber leaned forward as if sound had pressure. Corey smiled without warmth. There is no solution for you to publish. Your species cannot even perceive the problem space. Leora did not look up from her tablet. She wrote one line, erased half of it, and wrote it again with a steadier hand. Alum scholar delegate rose under point of procedure privilege. If independent audit is accepted, the scholars of LUM volunteer immediate technical arbitration. Denied again instantly by the Nexari clerk citing contamination risk from non-resonant models. The denial triggered low-level chatter across 3 diplomatic bands and 1 market channel that should not have been active inside session. Even in crisis, finance never slept. Corey stepped down from his dais rail and addressed the chamber as if pronouncing sentence. Observe the human tactic. They threaten collapse while pretending benevolence. They recruit debtors and malcontents with fantasies of free transit. They parade a child to harvest sympathy where they lack merit. This is what non-psychic politics produces. Noise, sentiment, and sabotage wrapped in legal costume. We reject their ultimatum. We reject their fabricated deadlines. Nexari fleets will conduct disciplinary demonstrations to remind this council that Hyperlane's answer to competence, not protest. The avian delegate from Kith folded both wing arms tight against his chest, a species gesture Elena had learned meant terror held in place by protocol. 2 seats away, The Thel Guardian sent another sideband pulse to the human console. This one was shorter. If he closes Cartham Gate, our medships die in transit. Please. Elena acknowledged receipt and opened a public channel instead of a private reply. To all delegations. The Terran warning stands. We will transmit identical terms through treaty registry within the hour. Non-combatant shipping advisories will follow. No species is required to choose between silence and starvation. Corey laughed, not loudly, but with the confidence of someone who believed physics itself endorsed his ego. You will issue advisories because that is all you can issue. The presiding clerk called session adjournment before Elena could answer, because procedural control was one more weapon, and the Nixari never wasted ammunition. In the corridor outside, pressure doors cycled, and diplomatic entourages split into rushing clusters. Nixari officers moved in perfect geometric files towards secured lifts, their silver cranial filaments faintly bright under overhead strip lights, minds linked in disciplined flow. Human aides kept walking at normal pace. The contrast read as calm until one noticed how quickly they cleared bystanders from the path. Marcus appeared again on the suite wall as soon as Elena crossed the threshold. He dismissed on record? He dismissed and escalated, Elena said. Disciplinary demonstrations language. Emergency law citation. No ambiguity. Becker's sanctions board updated in layered blocks of red and blue. Market sees it already. Nixari transit futures up 6 points on fear buy. Neutral carriers freezing departure windows. Insurance algorithms flagging human routes as unstable. Larson rotated a dark lane overlay into 3 dimensions. We can absorb 30% cargo displacement immediately if we expose relay skeleton A through D. 52 if we burn contingency fuel reserves. Marcus studied them all, then fixed on Leora. Status. She turned her tablet so the room could see a tight set of equations bracketed in black. Corey keeps invoking a psychic constant as if it is structural. It is not structural. It is an artifact from telepathic-only training sets. I can demonstrate stable boundary conditions without it. Not full closure yet in presentation form, but enough to invalidate exclusivity claims and break licensing confidence. How long for release package that survives hostile review? Elena asked. Leora hesitated, not from uncertainty but from precision. If Joseph handles formatting and Lum verifies independent replication paths, 22 hours. 18 if we strip explanatory notes. Marcus gave a dry look that might have been humor in a kinder century. Keep the notes. We are not launching a mystery religion. By the time the second station night cycle began, Treaty Registry had received humanity's formal 72-hour notice in 68 languages and 9 machine-proof dialects. Corey responded within 14 minutes with a single line. Non-resonant entities do not set terms for true minds. 72 hours later, almost to the second, 3 neutral trade gates went dark. The first was Cartham, where hospital freight queued in orderly cylinders and suddenly found nothing but dead geometry where a corridor had been. The second was Ven Relay, a grain artery feeding 7 outer colonies. The third was Ostra Junction, a mixed civilian node with no military significance except its symbolic value as proof that Nixari could pinch breath from any throat in the sector. Nixari media feeds labeled the shutdowns temporary safety recalibrations. Their internal channels called it Stage 1 compliance conditioning. Prefect Sayoran Ilex of the Nixari 7th Strike Group watched the operation unfold from the tactical pit of the cruiser Ascendant Mercy and felt the old certainty settle through the link state like warm current. Human command nets would now saturate with panic traffic. Civilian haulers would bunch into predictable fallback lanes. Escort destroyers would overcommit to visible choke points. Non-telepaths always did. Delay and fear had one rhythm across species, and Nixari minds had danced that rhythm for generations. Through shared intent mesh, Saren received Corey's strategic packet personally, a privilege reserved for high-trust cadres. The packet carried no ornament. Demonstrate helplessness. Strike human-protected convoys. Avoid full annihilation until compliance statement transmitted. Fear economics required witnesses. Soren expanded the battle space map. 3 human-marked convoys drifted near helix approach vectors, each with modest escort and no heavy capital presence. The telemetry looked almost insulting in its simplicity. Advance in triad fan, Soren ordered. Precognitive screens forward weighted. We break the lead escort first and force surrender broadcast from surviving merchant hulls. An aide with gold-flecked sensory filaments dipped his head. Human channels remain oddly quiet, Prefect. Soren did not bother to hide contempt. They are composing speeches. The first anomaly appeared 9 minutes into approach. One convoy simply was not there anymore. Not destroyed, not jumping. Gone from expected lane like a line erased from slate. Saorin demanded cross-spectrum confirmation and got it from 7 instruments. Residual wake signatures indicated deliberate reroute through an unregistered dark corridor with gravitic masking so efficient it might as well have been sorcery to any naval planner who believed only in licensed gates. A second convoy split into 12 micro-trajectories, each packeted behind decoy freight transponders that spoofed mass and destination. By the time Nexari targeting solutions settled, half those signatures were empty drones, and the real cargo was already beyond interception envelope. Sauron felt irritation ripple through the mesh. Irritation, then something sharper as predictive models started producing contradictory threat trees. One branch showed human escorts charging recklessly. Another showed immediate retreat. A third showed no tactical response at all, only widening civilian dispersion patterns that made coercive capture economically useless. Local jamming? An aide asked. No, Saren said slowly. Pattern injection. Then the sector markets collapsed. It began with a routine financial alert, small enough to ignore in combat posture. Iridian futures volatility spike. Then another. Licensing derivative freeze on 5 exchanges. Then 26 alerts in under 3 minutes, cascading as trading houses parsed a new document, flooding open data channels from Earth, LUM, PAX, and a dozen independent academic nodes that had not trusted one another for decades, and now were verifying the same thing in public. Partial convergence proof. Author: Leora Hayes, Terran Union Junior Analyst Program. Co-validated boundary conditions attached. Saren opened the file with reflexive disdain and felt, through the shared link, 5 nearby minds do the same. They expected rhetoric. They found mathematics. The proof did not close the entire equation. It did something worse to Nixari control. It demonstrated that the so-called psychic constant collapsed under mixed cognition variance, and that stable solutions improved when non-telepathic noise terms were modeled directly instead of discarded. In one stroke, the document reframed 3 centuries of doctrine from sacred necessity to expensive bias. Client worlds began transmitting demands for immediate license renegotiation before Sauron finished page 9. An Nexari commerce attaché broke protocol and patched into tactical priority. Prefect, futures markets are treating our gate tariffs as artificial scarcity. Credit backstops are being withdrawn. If this replication holds, collateral chains rupture in hours. Saorin cut the channel with a thought and locked the tactical display onto the remaining human escort group. Needing something physical, something punishable. The human ships held formation at long range, compact and quiet, broadcasting no emotional leakage to telepathic probes because there was no telepathic field to read. Their data bursts came in asynchronous packets on randomized intervals, too irregular for standard anticipatory filtering. Every time Nixari screens projected an intent corridor, the human vector shifted a few degrees, and the future tree split again. For the first time in Saren's career, precognition officers asked for manual fallback. Maintain pressure, Saren snapped, more harshly than intended. They are improvising. We are doctrine. Yet, even as he spoke, another advisory cut across all channels, this one impossible to suppress because it carried treaty authentication and civilian safety codes. Terran Union Emergency Transit Bulletin. Dark lane relays active for protected shipping. Open access tokens available to all signatory carriers. No Nixari license required. The language was polite. The effect was catastrophic. On the council station, Elena watched the same feeds with Becker and Larson, while Marcus remained a steady voice from command. No one celebrated. They were still counting hospital shipments, food tonnage, and escort attrition risk. Lyora sat at the end of the table with stylus ink on her fingers, reading hostile critiques as fast as they appeared and answering each with citations and clean derivations. Corey's face returned on public broadcast an hour after the gates went dark, expression carved from outrage and disbelief. This forgery will be erased. This theft will be punished. Nixari authority is not negotiable. Elena keyed a response for all channels, legal and military together. Your 72 hours expired. Your shutdowns are documented. Your demonstrations have failed. Civilian transit is moving. Independent verification is in progress. Stand down your strike groups and reopen the gates, or we proceed to the next package. In the Helix approaches, Saren received new orders from the Synod command spine, stripped of all pretense now. Commit heavier assets, force decisive engagement, reclaim narrative through destruction. He looked once more at the human formations that refused to behave like prey and understood, with a cold edge of anger he would not share across the link, that this was no longer a compliance action. It was the first battle of a war the Nixari had already started losing in their own minds. Saren snapped the tactical lattice into close-range resolution and drove his strike group forward, intent mesh flaring around him as 3 Nixari cruisers and 9 cutter screens advanced on the nearest human escorts. The Helix approaches were normally quiet, a braided volume of lawful transit where civilian traffic trusted published mathematics more than warship armor. Now, the corridor was cluttered with decoy buoys, refugee carriers, and the flicker of emergency routing beacons as freight captains fled, whichever authority seemed less likely to starve them next month. Across that chaos, the human formation remained unnervingly disciplined. 6 destroyer mass hulls in offset pairs, no telepathic wash for Nixari readers to sample, and a command cadence that never settled into pattern. On Earth Command Relay, Marcus watched the same map bloom, with red predictive cones from Nixari precognition engines and blue human vectors that refused to hold still long enough to be trapped. They are overcommitting to a clean kill, he said, voice steady over fleet channel. Package 1 is authorized. Keep civilians behind Dark Lane mask. Do not chase triumphs, break their confidence, then break contact. Human captains answered with clipped acknowledgments that barely rose above background static. The spectacle of command was absent by design. No stirring speech, no emotional leakage. Just distributed intent packeting through asynchronous nodes that treated latency as camouflage and uncertainty as a weapon. Elena stood in the council suite beside Becker and Larson, eyes fixed on the layered tactical feed, while Lyora ran live corrections on convergence drift for every civilian ship taking the new open protocol. The child's stylus moved in short, precise strokes, then paused as she flagged a transit risk near Astra's dead gate. Tell Helix Control to shift convoy Delta 6 degrees spinward. she said without looking up. Nexari screens are waiting the old constant. Their safe envelope is skewed. Larson relayed it to Fleet Ops. 20 seconds later, the convoy altered course and passed through a sheer pocket Nexari doctrine classified as non-navigable. On Saren's display, 12 freighters seemed to slide through a wall of bad physics and vanish into stable transit wake as though someone had rewritten geometry in front of him. His gunnery chief whispered across the mesh, unguarded enough that everyone heard it. "They are using the child's model in real time." Saren cut him off. "They are using unverified math and luck. Target escorts." Yet the next firing solution collapsed the same way the first had. Nexari precognitive officers projected a probable human dodge, fed it to weapon arrays, and watched human destroyers split into asynchronous microbursts that violated every rhythm telepathic anticipation had been trained to exploit. It was not faster than Nexari reaction speed. It was less coherent, intentionally jagged, each maneuver selected by local machine-human teams from weighted random libraries keyed to battlefield conditions and denied to central command until execution. The result looked sloppy to old doctrine and lethal to anyone trying to read intent through psychic harmonics. A Nexari cruiser fired a broad lance where 3 futures said a human ship would be. The human ship was somewhere else by a fraction that became kilometers at combat velocities. A human rail salvo answered from a vector Saren's screens had downgraded as low probability. 2 Nexari cutter screens lost propulsion and spun clear, hulls intact, but fight removed. Marcus allowed himself one short breath. "Good," he said. "Now show them the second layer." From behind the human line, a swarm of small craft ignited on staggered delays and fanned into the battle space. They were not fighters in the old heroic sense, nor missiles in the traditional sense. They were command shuttles, sensor ghosts, relay drones, and decoy emitters sharing no single profile long enough to classify. Some carried munitions. Most carried confusion. Each one injected narrowband signal fragments into Nexari predictive channels, echoes of command intention that looked authentic for 2 seconds and then dissolved. Nexari telepaths reached for coherence and found branching noise. For the first time, Saren saw his precognition pit lose discipline. Officers requested reduced link depth to avoid cognitive overload, then requested manual authority on targeting as forecast trees multiplied into contradiction. One branch warned of a human pincer that never formed. Never. Another showed retreat while kinetic lances arrived from dead angles. The mesh that had given Nexari fleets their reputation now fed their weapons too many futures to trust. By the 3rd hour after the gate shutdowns, neutral observers on Council security channels began using a phrase Elena had expected but still found grimly satisfying. Nexari intent advantage degraded. Corey responded with a command burst to all strike groups, his words transmitted as decree and threat in equal measure. You are not facing peers. You are facing vandals with stolen abstractions. Reassert synchronization at maximum depth. Burn through contradiction. The weak flood channels with noise because they cannot sustain truth. Saren obeyed, because defiance inside the Nexari command lattice had always been career suicide. He deepened the link, accepted the headache spike as dozens of subordinate minds pushed raw telemetry into shared space, and ordered full convergence volley against the lead human pair. For 9 seconds, the old confidence returned. Futures narrowed. Targets stabilized. Weapons charged. Then, one human destroyer cut thrust, rolled broadside into what looked like a catastrophic error, and released a cloud of metallic chaff seeded with micro-relays that rebroadcast false intent signatures at harmonic frequencies tuned to Nexari psychic filtering. The second destroyer vanished behind that storm, its true vector masked by engineered nonsense. Nixari gunners fired into the densest probability knot and tore open empty debris, while the real ship crossed their flank and disabled a cruiser's command antenna with 3 precise kinetic strikes. "Report," Saren demanded. "A command relay severed," an aide answered. "Cruiser Reverent Line cannot maintain mesh lock." The tide did not turn in a cinematic instant. It shifted by accumulated humiliations, each one small enough to deny and large enough to matter. A failed intercept here, a convoy slipped through there, a firing solution wasted on ghosts, a cutter stranded because its own pilots had trusted one future too much and ignored 5 ugly alternatives. In the council chamber, delegations that had lived under Nixari corridor blackmail for generations watched raw telemetry feeds with an intensity usually reserved for famine bulletins. The LUM scholars published replication notes in real time. The merchants of Pax reopened suspended contracts under Hayes protocol routing tables. The Kith delegate, who had once looked at Leora with pity, now requested emergency accession to the open navigation framework and signed within minutes. Elena kept her face neutral when she answered. "Accession accepted. Civilian protections apply immediately. Submit medical priority lists first." Leora looked up only long enough to ask, "Can we push Revision 7 to Helix escorts? Their drift correction is still assuming perfect gravitic calm." "Do it," Elena said. The update propagated across fleet channels in 41 seconds. 2 human escorts adjusted their turn timing by less than a heartbeat and avoided a Nixari trap that existed in old math and failed in new math. Capability had become doctrine at machine speed, and the doctrine had a 12-year-old author signing changes with calm handwriting. Sayorin felt the strategic ground sliding and hated the sensation because it arrived not as defeat but as uncertainty. He had been raised in a system where uncertainty belonged to lesser species, where Nexari mind link rendered ambiguity manageable and therefore power legitimate. Yet every instrument around him now testified that their monopoly had never been pure mastery. It had been mastery over a narrowed problem, defended by law, fear, and deliberate exclusion of data that did not fit telepathic assumptions. An encrypted advisory from Synod Finance cut into his priority queue despite combat lock. He almost discarded it, then read the first line and went still. Collateral cascade confirmed across 31 client systems. Emergency liquidity failed. Dependent governors requesting independent gate access via human protocol. He transmitted the alert to command spine expecting denial. Corey answered personally, link state pressure sharp enough to sting. Markets are narrative instruments. Win the engagement and credit returns. With respect, High Commander, Soren sent, choosing each word as if stepping across thin ice. This engagement now reflects structural compromise. Their non-resonant solution is replicating across neutral academies. Our predictive mesh is saturating under asynchronous intent. We require doctrinal adjustment, not only force concentration. The response came as a cold psychic lash, wrapped in formal language. You require obedience. Doctrine does not fail because insects scatter. Tighten your officers. Kill something visible. Sauron cut the link harder than protocol allowed and turned to his bridge crew, where the old certainty had given way to disciplined fear. They were still Nexari, still trained, still dangerous, but the room no longer moved like a single organism. Too many minds were protecting themselves from the shared channel that had once made them superior. He chose a compromise that would have been unthinkable 1 week earlier. Reduce mesh depth by 30%. Sectorized command authority. Precognition advisory, not mandatory. We fight with eyes and instruments if thought space is contaminated. No one challenged him. That frightened him more than open protest would have. Across the battle space, the narrower Nexari link reduced cognitive noise and briefly improved local coordination. Human losses ticked upward as 2 decoy craft were destroyed and an escort frigate took a propulsion hit that forced withdrawal behind civilian screens. Marcus watched the update and nodded once, not pleased, only confirming that adaptive enemies remained dangerous. They can still learn, he told Fleet Command. Assume competence. Keep pressure on command relays and logistics. Do not drift into contempt. Becker, listening from the council suite, gave a grim half-smile. That warning should be carved above every ministry door. 90 minutes later, as Helix traffic rerouted under human protective protocols and Nexari strike groups pulled back to reform lines, Sauron stood at his tactical pit and reviewed losses he had never imagined taking in a compliance action. Ships were not obliterated in dramatic fire. They were neutralized, blinded, economically stranded, and maneuvered out of relevance while civilian corridors kept moving without Nexari permission. It was a quieter kind of defeat, and, in some ways, more corrosive. He opened a secure channel to the surviving prefects and delivered the first honest operational brief of his career. Our assumptions were wrong in 3 domains. 1. Non-telepathic cognition can solve convergence at production reliability. 2. Human command doctrine is intentionally non-deterministic and degrades psychic anticipation. 3. Client dependence on Nexari licensing is no longer guaranteed. We are no longer disciplining a frontier species. We are fighting an adaptive coalition with expanding legitimacy. A younger prefect answered with anger covering panic. Then, we strike their academies, erase the proof, and restore fear. Sauron looked at the combat map, at convoys still moving under open codes, at neutral signatures joining human escort umbrellas one by one. You cannot erase mathematics once every school has it, he said. And fear does not invoice well when alternatives exist. He ended the channel and sent the only recommendation likely to keep his forces alive long enough for higher command to ignore him. Consolidate at Helix Junction. Rebuild mesh architecture. Prepare counter-narrative and massed engagement. Regroup for decisive operation under Synod authority. The acknowledgement arrived from command spine with a single line carrying Corey's authentication seal. Approved. Grand Synod fleet en route. Hold position and await instruction. Sauron stared at the line until the letters blurred slightly at the edges, then straightened his shoulders and returned to the work of arranging ships into a shape that might survive what came next. The Nexari had spent centuries teaching the galaxy that history belonged to those who controlled transit. At Helix, transit had slipped their grasp, and now history was coming for them with human patience, open mathematics, and guns held in very steady hands. Marcus read Corey's authorization seal twice, then forwarded it to every human command node with a single annotation. Confirmed. They are committing strategic reserve. Execute Lantern Veil phase. On the bridge of the carrier Resolute Dawn, Captain Sophia Lindqvist watched that annotation propagate across a tactical web that looked almost understated compared with Nexari visual doctrine. No ceremonial overlays. No heroic iconography. Just vectors, fuel states, civilian priority flags, and confidence intervals recalculated every 3 seconds. When Lantern Veil unlocked, new symbols appeared in pale green around Helix Junction, each marker tagged to vessels the Nexari had cataloged for years as harmless logistics. Tanker trains, modular repair arcs, customs tenders, and agricultural bulk haulers purchased by shell cooperatives across neutral space. Every one of them opened weapons shutters, not superweapons, not miracles. Coaxial kinetic rails built into structural spines, point defense forests hidden behind cargo plating, and drone racks disguised as container stacks. Humanity had spent 14 years building merchant hulls that could become escort hulls inside 90 seconds because history had taught them that wars rarely began with declarations and often began with someone interrupting medicine shipments. Lindqvist keyed fleet-wide broadcast. Lanternvale active. Rules remain unchanged. Civilian corridors stay sacred. We disable command and mobility, not habitats. Confirm. Acknowledgements rolled in from ships crewed by Earthborn officers, Martian unions, belt cooperatives, and allied exchange teams that had trained under human convoy law because no one else had offered to teach them without hidden debt clauses. The sudden expansion doubled available human fire coverage around Helix without adding a single jump signature the Nexari could have pre-targeted. In Sauron's tactical pit, warning tones piled atop one another until an aide muted half the stack just to keep speech intelligible. Prefect, 42 previously civilian hulls have switched transponder class to auxiliary defense. Their tonnage profiles were legal freight. We have archived years of scans. Soren studied the overlays and felt a narrow line of admiration cut through anger. Then, they planned this longer than our analysts admitted. Update threat taxonomy now. No more civilian assumptions inside human umbrella. Another alarm arrived from farther spinward. Human drone clusters were stitching temporary comm lattices between neutral stations, creating an adaptive mesh that routed around every jam attempt within seconds. Nexari doctrine had always treated communications disruption as prelude to panic. Human doctrine treated disruption as a routing problem. Corey's command spine demanded immediate offensive action. Soren answered with candor that would have ended his career in any calmer era. We are facing concealed military conversion across civilian architecture. Their logistics layer is armed, distributed, and legally insulated by convoy protection statutes they drafted years ago. Request authority for strategic withdrawal to fortified depth and negotiated deconfliction. Corey replied in a pulse so cold it made Saren's bridge crew flinch despite reduced mesh depth. Denied. Crush the demonstration. I will not permit insects to redefine force by repainting cargo. The Nexari line advanced anyway, disciplined and still formidable, but the old asymmetry had narrowed. Human conversion hulls did not need to win dramatic victories. They needed to keep lanes open, blunt coercion, and make every Nexari thrust expensive enough to break the economics Corey had built his regime on. Kinetic exchanges lit the corridor in short, violent geometry. 2 converted haulers lost maneuvering clusters and fell back under tug escort. A Nexari cruiser took cascading sensor outages when drone clouds embedded across its hull and saturated optics with calibrated glare. Neither side gained cinematic dominance. One side gained options. Elena watched from the council operations tier as neutral delegates who had spent decades deferring to Nexari inevitability began requesting technical briefings from human liaison officers instead of Nexari clerks. The shift was subtle in body language and absolute in political meaning. Power moved first in assumptions, then in votes. A Thel Guardian appeared on Elena's side channel, armored shoulders bowed with fatigue after 40 hours of triage routing. Ambassador, our border hospitals confirm receipt of delayed antibiotics. Your dark lane escorts held. We are alive because your people treated transit as duty, not leverage. Elena answered with formal restraint that did not hide relief. Log the receipt on public registry. Transparency protects everyone. The Guardian inclined his head. Done. Also, we are sending 3 patrol wings to your corridor net under humanitarian charter. We were neutral yesterday. Today? Elena asked. Today we remember who tried to starve us and who kept ships moving. 6 hours into Lantern Vale, the second human capability reveal landed where Corey could not censor it. Legitimacy at scale. Humanity had not only built hidden force inside commerce, it had built legal frameworks, interoperability drills, and public audit trails that let frightened species join quickly without surrendering sovereignty. Nexari coercion relied on dependency. Human architecture invited participation. By the end of the station's third night cycle, 17 polities had acceded to provisional open transit standards, and 5 sent escort craft to Helix under joint civilian protection mandates. Leora remained in the operations suite with ink-stained hands and red-rimmed eyes, refusing rest until Becker finally set a meal beside her terminal and stood there until she ate half of it. The girl pushed Revision 9 of Hayes Protocol with a note that made LUM scholars laugh aloud in exhausted admiration. If your simulation breaks here, your random seed is lying to you. Larson fed her update into convoy systems. Revision 9 stabilized mixed fleet turns by 12%. You just made coalition piloting easier for species that still use 3 incompatible inertial models. Leora shrugged, then frowned at a new diagnostic. Nexari are adapting. They are pruning mesh depth and letting local captains improvise. Their accuracy goes up when they stop insisting on one future. Marcus joined from command relay, expression worn but focused. That means they are learning the same lesson we did generations ago. Good. Respect keeps us honest. What do we hit next? Becker answered before anyone else. Insurance. Not missiles, insurance. Nexari lenders are trying to freeze payouts to clients that adopted open routing, calling it unauthorized transit risk. If they succeed, merchants abandon us even with safe lanes. Elena nodded. Can we counter inside treaty law? Already drafting, Becker said. Emergency indemnity fund backed by Terran Central Reserve and coalition bonds. We guarantee losses for any carrier using audited open protocols. Marcus gave a short, grim smile. We are now fighting with destroyers and actuarial tables. Elena called it years ago, Becker replied. Monopoly is a weapon system. Orders moved. Within 90 minutes, the indemnity fund went live. Signed by human ministries, LUM academies, Pax merchant guilds, and 2 Kith city-states that had once feared offending Corey more than they feared hunger. Freight rates normalized. Convoy departures resumed. Another pressure point slipped from Nexari control. Saren received those market updates in real time and understood with professional clarity that tasted like ash that he was no longer operating in a military campaign with economic side effects. He was watching an integrated species response that treated ethics, law, logistics, and firepower as one continuum. Nexari Command had spent centuries perfecting dominance through specialization and hierarchy. Humans were winning through messy, relentless integration. He convened his senior officers in person, a practice old Nexari elites considered primitive. No link state chorus, no enforced emotional synchronization. Just a room, breathing bodies, and hard choices. We have been taught that coherence means sameness, Saren said. Our enemy shows another model. Diverse cognition, distributed authority, shared objective. Their unpredictability is not disorder. It is designed resilience. We cannot undo their proof. We can still preserve lives if we stop pretending this is a demonstration. A weapons officer asked the question none had dared phrase on Mesh. Are we losing, Prefect? We are losing the assumptions that made our old victories cheap, Saorin said. If Synod continues this path, we lose more than battles. He sent Corey a final advisory recommending ceasefire corridors and immediate independent audit participation to salvage Nexari civilian infrastructure before credit collapse spread into habitat maintenance. The reply never addressed his analysis. It carried only operational coordinates and one command line. All surviving strike groups to Helix Junction. Grand Synod fleet arrival in 11 hours. Prepare for total engagement. In the human sector command, Marcus read the intercept and looked toward the wall display where Helix rotated as a pale knot of lanes and gravitic tides. 11 hours was enough to plan, not enough to sleep. He opened a secure channel that linked fleet captains, convoy marshals, scientific liaisons, and allied observers in one call. Faces and species forms filled the grid. Lindqvist in gunmetal bridge light, a lum mathematician with fractal script scrolling behind him, Kith Patrol Leader Surratt folding wing arms with controlled tension, Thel Triage Commander Vero still wearing medical seals on combat armor because there had been no time to change. Marcus spoke without theatrics, and that was why every line carried weight. For 3 centuries, the Nexari sold transit as mercy while using it as a leash. In 3 days, we proved that mathematics belongs to everyone, not to a caste. In 6 hours, we proved civilian architecture can defend itself when people cooperate before crisis. They are now bringing their strategic fleet to Helix to restore fear by spectacle. We will not give them that spectacle. We will give them consequence. He shifted tone, still calm, now edged with iron. Our objectives are unchanged. 1. Protect civilian corridors. 2. Dismantle Synod command capacity at Helix. 3. Preserve evidence chains for tribunal review. We are not here to punish a species. We are here to end a regime practice. Hold discipline. Hold formation. Hold each other to the standards that made others join us today. No one cheered. Professionals acknowledged orders and returned to work. Leora listened from her terminal and then asked for channel priority. Marcus granted it. Her voice was young and steady. I have one request for all coalition pilots. Do not trust your first good solution. Run one more check for bias, especially if the answer flatters your doctrine. That is how this started. The lum mathematician bowed his head to her image. Noted, Analyst Hayes. We teach that line now. 8 hours before projected contact, the first edge elements of the Grand Synod fleet appeared on deep-range scopes. Heavy dreadnoughts, psionic relay barges, carrier clusters, and command citadels moving in rigid harmonic spacing meant to amplify Nexari link state across entire combat theaters. It was the largest concentration of Nexari force in a century, the kind of fleet assembled to make history kneel. Helix filled with motion. Human conversion holes repositioned into layered screens around civilian vectors. Allied patrol wings slotted into assigned arcs with a competence that surprised even themselves. Drone foundries aboard repurposed refinery ships began printing decoys and repair spiders by the tens of thousands. Legal teams on the council station mirrored every command log to neutral archives so no one could erase culpability afterward. Then came the human maneuver that confirmed the turning point. Larson and Becker executed a coordinated registry strike across treaty databases, insurance exchanges, and gate authority ledgers using warrants pre-cleared under emergency anti-coercion statutes. In 17 minutes, Nexari emergency seizure rights were frozen across coalition space pending tribunal review. Their fleets still had guns, but their ability to compel civilian compliance through paperwork vanished in one legal pulse. Merchant captains who had spent lifetimes bowing to Nexari clerks received the same notice in plain language. Nexari transit debt suspended by multilateral order. Continue under open protocols. Sayorin saw the notice and closed his eyes for one measured breath. Corey had wanted narrative control through overwhelming force. Humans had met force with systems, then removed the narrative. He opened one last private channel to Elena Volkov, routed through neutral encryption, and marked commander to diplomat. A breach that could have condemned him if anyone in Synod command recovered authority. Ambassador, he said, voice stripped of ceremonial contempt. Your coalition now controls access legitimacy at Helix. Corey will still attack. He believes terror can reprice reality. If you can end his command spine quickly, many of mine will stand down. We were trained to obey certainty. You have made certainty expensive. Elena held his gaze across the delay. Transmit your civilian habitat dependencies and medical grid coordinates. We will not target them. A pause. Then Sarin sent the files. External contact resolved within minutes. Becker flagged the data as authentic, and human planners carved no strike exclusions into the battle matrix. The choice was practical and moral at once. 3 hours before contact, Helix Junction became a suspended geometry of waiting fleets, silent channels, and burning stars beyond the tactical plane. Corey's flagship signatures entered outer range like a moving wall. Human and allied ships held position, guns live, corridors open behind them. The final confrontation was no longer a threat spoken in chambers. It was approaching on measured vectors, and this time the galaxy was watching with alternatives in hand. Corey's flagship signatures crossed the inner marker, and his voice flooded every military and civilian channel at once, amplified by Synod relay barges, until it seemed to come from the metal bones of Helix itself. All unauthorized formations will disengage and submit to Nexari corrective control. Civilian vessels remaining inside this theater will be classified as shields for insurgent action. Humanity has distributed corrupted convergence doctrine and weaponized trade panic against lawful custodianship. You will now witness the cost of defiance. There will be no negotiation after this transmission. Marcus answered from resolute dawn before fear could harden into paralysis. His tone stayed level, almost administrative, and that restraint landed harder than fury. All Nexari units are ordered to power down offensive systems and withdraw beyond Helix outer range. Your seizure rights are suspended by multilateral warrant. Your command traffic is mirrored to neutral archives. Any strike on civilian corridors will be treated as deliberate war crime and answered immediately. We have no interest in extermination, occupation, or spectacle. We do not need your permission to keep lanes open. Stand down now. Corey did not reply. He attacked. The Grand Synod fleet advanced in rigid harmonic bands, dreadnoughts centered around psionic relay barges that flared silver-white as link-state depth, surged across the Nexari line. On Sauron's tactical pit, the old architecture reappeared in terrifying elegance. Unified intent cones, synchronized target trees, near-instant corrections that had crushed slower enemies for generations. The first Nexari barrage slammed into the Coalition's forward decoy wall and vaporized empty drone shells by the hundred, then corrected with machine precision toward real escorts. Lindqvist had been waiting for exactly that correction. "Phase Blackglass," she said. "Open corridor ghost." At her command, gravitic shear buoys hidden for weeks inside, abandoned customs canisters ignited along a narrow arc that looked like retreat space. It was a false corridor, mathematically valid for 7 seconds and ruinous on the 8th, threaded with local tide distortions only the updated Haze protocol could track safely. Human conversion hulls pulled back on schedule, broadcasting panicked-looking vector noise through quantum ghost arrays that mimicked command intention without any command behind it. Nexari precognition screens drank the bait. Soren watched 3 futures converge on his display, each insisting the humans were breaking left in disorder. He had half a breath to challenge it before Corey's direct priority lock overrode local discretion and drove the lead Nexari wedge straight into the corridor throat. 7 seconds held. The 8th tore formation apart. No ships exploded in theatrical fireballs. They sheared out of alignment, lost mesh coherence, and drifted into each other's firing geometry while trying to evade futures that no longer existed. 2 relay barges clipped gravitic turbulence and dropped out of amplification phase. A heavy cruiser rolled 30 degrees off axis, exposing its command spine to waiting kinetic lances from hidden human rails that had remained cold and silent until that exact moment. 3 tungsten strikes punched through antenna forests and severed fleet-wide intent distribution across an entire Nexari battle tier. 23 minutes into the engagement, the Grand Synod fleet stopped behaving like one fleet. Marcus did not chase annihilation. "Cut the spine," he ordered. "Leave exits open." Human and allied ships surged through the gaps in disciplined packets, firing to disable propulsion, sensor stacks, and relay nodes rather than core habitats. Kith patrol wings screened medical convoys behind them. Thel armored cutters dragged damaged freighters clear of the kill envelope while still returning fire with stubborn accuracy. A LUM analysis ship, never designed for combat, sat inside a ring of human escorts and pushed live convergence corrections to every coalition pilot in theater. Someone on its bridge transmitted a dry channel note that spread through coalition command like a pressure release. It turns out peer review is a weapons platform. Saorin's reduced mesh doctrine saved part of his command from total collapse, but not from reality. Every minute the link state remained fractured, Nexari advantages bled into parity, and then into deficit. He rerouted surviving cruisers to protect withdrawal vectors and sent emergency stand-down guidance to any captain still receiving his signal. Half acknowledged. The other half were trapped under Corey's hard override and kept charging into contradictions. On the Council Operations tier, Elena stood with Becker and Larson, while Leora's final proof package sat queued behind 6 layers of authentication. Leora's hands trembled once, then steadied as she looked at Marcus on the secure feed. "If we publish now, their doctrine breaks completely. There is no putting it back." Elena answered without looking away from the battle map. "Publish." The full convergence closure hit the network under open license, with derivations, test suites, failure cases, and replication tools in plain language. LUM, Pax, Thel, Kith, and 15 neutral academies verified on arrival. Every gate authority in range received the same keyline in standardized legal script. No psychic constant required. No exclusivity claim mathematically defensible. In Nexari command channels, ideology failed at bandwidth speed. Corey responded with escalation that bordered on madness. He ordered all remaining relay citadels at Helix to maximum synaptic amplification and instructed attached fleets to hold position regardless of hull state, while he prepared a theater-wide psionic suppression surge. If triggered, it would not win him the battle. It would scorch cognition across friend and foe in range, leaving civilian traffic blind and uncontrolled for days. Sauron heard the order and felt open revolt ripple through officers who had spent their lives obeying. "He will burn our own crews," one captain sent, voice stripped to raw disbelief. "He will burn everyone," Sauron answered. "Do not execute." For the first time in recorded Nexari military history, prefect-level units refused a Synod combat command in active engagement. Marcus had already anticipated the attempt. "Boarding teams execute Citadel cut," he said. Human marine transports punched through debris shadows toward the Helix relay citadels, escorted by drone curtains and precision fire from Linkfist's line. Their objective was narrow and mercilessly technical: breach amplifier cores, sever synaptic uplinks, preserve data logs. Sergeant Anna Kowalski's team hit Citadel 3 under crossfire that carved armor and hull plating around them, magnetized to the station skin, and cut through maintenance access in 40 seconds. Inside, Nexari technicians tried to trigger purge protocols. Human electronic warfare teams jammed the sequence, extracted command archives, and physically removed amplifier lattice modules one by one until the Citadel's psychic output dropped to background noise. Citadel 1 and 2 fell within 6 minutes of each other. With each shutdown, Nexari formation discipline degraded further. Corey retreated to the bridge sanctum of sovereign silence, surrounded by loyalist guards and a shrinking circle of officers who could still hear him clearly through the collapsing mesh. He keyed the overload routine manually and demanded biometric concurrence from his senior command staff. No one moved. He turned on them with naked contempt. Authorize it. We deny them the narrative and sanctify our mandate in fire. Sauron appeared on his bridge display via emergency patch, bloodless with exhaustion, but steady. High Commander, the battle is lost. Civilian channels are open under coalition protection. Our fleets are fragmented. If you trigger overload, you kill Nexari crews in unarmed traffic and still lose Helix. Issue surrender code. Corey's face twisted. You weak-minded traitor. You let insects teach you fear. I learned arithmetic, Saren said. And consequence. Before Corey could cut the channel, the deck bucked under 3 controlled impacts as human breaching charges disabled the Dreadnought's outer weapon ring without puncturing habitat compartments. Warning glyphs stuttered across his command glass. Boarding alarms followed, then local communications failure as human Marines and Nexari defectors jointly seized the relay room 2 decks below. Corey drew a sidearm and backed toward the overload pedestal. They will never parade me. The bridge doors blew inward in a wash of smoke and sparks. Marine Captain David Mitchell entered first, visor scorched, rifle leveled, center mass. High Commander Corey, he called, voice carrying over emergency klaxons. Step away from the console and place your weapon on the deck. You are under lawful detention by multilateral authority for war crimes and unlawful attacks on civilian transit. Corey raised the weapon, hesitated, then saw 2 of his own guards lower theirs and step aside. The movement broke whatever certainty he had left. His arm dipped. The pistol clattered across the floor. Mitchell advanced, locked restraints around Corey's wrists and turned him toward the bridge cameras that were already feeding neutral archives. Detainee secured, he said. Overload system disabled. Command bridge under coalition control. 90 seconds later, Corey stood in restraint frame before a live council feed. Silver filaments dimmed, uniform torn at one shoulder, hatred intact. Delegates from species he had starved for decades watched in absolute silence as the presiding clerk verified identity and asked for surrender authentication. Corey bared his teeth. You are blind animals with stolen fire. Elena stepped into frame from the council tier, voice clear enough to cut through static and history together. For 3 centuries we were patient. We hoped you would choose law over predation. You chose poorly. She held his gaze, then continued in the same measured cadence. This chamber does not require your dignity. It requires your code. Transmit unconditional surrender to all surviving Nexari forces now, or your commanders will do it without you and record your refusal beside every casualty log. Corey tried one last posture of supremacy. You cannot govern what you cannot hear. Leora's final proof icon rotated on every screen in the chamber and on every tactical display still functioning at Helix. Elena did not look away from Corey. We heard enough. Sauron's authorization key appeared beside the clerk's prompt, then 12 more keys from Nexari prefects who had rejected overload. Corey saw them, understood the hierarchy had already moved past him, and for the first time his expression shifted from rage to something smaller and far more human. Recognition that the future he had sold as inevitable was gone. His voice came out flat. This is High Commander Corey of the Nixari Synod. By Command Authority Seal 9, I issue unconditional surrender of all Nixari military assets in Helix Theater and attached corridors. Power down weapons. Accept coalition boarding. Preserve civilian support grids. Repeat. Unconditional surrender. The clerk demanded repetition for legal certainty. Corey repeated it. Across Helix Junction, Nixari guns powered down one by one. Across Helix Junction, Nixari guns powered down one by one, and the first sound many bridges heard after days of combat was not cheering, but breathing. Crews realizing they could unclench their hands without losing a corridor. On the Sovereign Silence, Captain David Mitchell kept Corey in restraints beside the disabled overload pedestal, while combat engineers sealed it with bright orange tribunal tape and dual-species evidence tags. The sidearm Corey had dropped was placed in a clear forensic canister, logged to Neutral Archive, and scanned by 3 independent clerks before anyone touched it again. One deck below, the extracted synaptic lattice modules from Citadels 1 through 3 were packed in damped containers, each unit cross-referenced to the command archives Kowalski's teams had pulled before purge routines could trigger. Nothing vanished into victory fog. Every item got a number. Every number got witnesses. A Nixari guard who had stepped aside during Corey's arrest slumped against a rail, burned by a panel flash when the bridge grid failed. Mitchell waved his rifle down and called for a medic. The Marine medic knelt, cut away fused fabric, and applied a cooling seal while 2 human Marines covered the corridor. Corey watched with open contempt that gradually bent toward and confusion. "You patch him," Corey said through clenched teeth, "while my command collapses." Mitchell did not look at him. "He is a prisoner now. So are you. That changes what we do. It makes you weak. It makes us lawful." On Helix Central Traffic Control, Elena stood between Becker and Larson as surrender acknowledgments rolled in from Nixari captains, then from captains who had refused Corey's overload, then from panic-stricken logistics officers asking whether coalition fire would follow retreating ships into habitat lanes. Elena opened a full theater channel and spoke with formal clarity. "All Nixari military crews that power down, transmit identity logs, and hold outside civilian vectors will receive protected surrender status. No retaliatory strikes are authorized. Medical transfer lanes are now active for all wounded, including Nixari personnel. Civilian support grids marked in the Sayoran file remain no-strike infrastructure under coalition mandate. Violations will be prosecuted regardless of flag." Becker glanced sideways. "You just gave our angriest allies a policy they will hate for 6 hours. "And respect for 50 years, Elena said. 3 hours later, inside the chamber of 12,000, where Corey had mocked signal-deaf animals, the same concentric rings filled for emergency post-conflict session. This time, the Merchants of Pax delegate requested floor recognition and received it before the Nixari clerk could reach his console. He rose with both hands visible, voice unsteady at first and then hardening. "Pax lost 14 convoys to coercive seizures over 20 years. Today, we petition for revenge strikes against Nixari core habitats. We withdraw that petition. Coalition logs show human commanders held fire on civilian arrays even while taking losses. We choose the standard they chose." A Carthim medical representative followed, transmitting live ward footage. Antibiotics unloading, triage lines moving, no one asking species before opening crates. The Thel Guardian, who had once sent Elena a desperate sideband message, spoke next, armor still marked by sealant from damaged transport decks. "Our hospital survived because humans treated transit as duty. Let the record show we asked for help and received it without debt contract." Corey appeared on a restraint feed at Chamber Center for identity confirmation and charges. He tried once to turn the hearing into theater, calling the proceedings theft, masquerading as law. The presiding panel ignored the provocation and read evidence chain after evidence chain. The gate shutdown orders, the compliance conditioning directives, the command to trigger theater-wide psionic suppression, the refusal by subordinate prefects, the captured overload sequence with Corey's biometric lock. Saren testified by secure link, exhausted and precise, admitting his own role in enforcing coercive doctrine and documenting the point at which command crossed into indiscriminate intent. By the fourth day, after Helix, coalition engineer teams reached Nexari habitats whose support grids had been abandoned during Cinna retreat planning. Human power modules were craned into failing nodes, while LUM systems crews recalibrated load balance, and Kith pilots escorted supply shuttles through debris weather. In Dock 9 of Habitat Elir, a Nexari elder stared at the human technicians restoring thermal circulation and asked, in careful trade speech, why the coalition had not left them to freeze. Sergeant Anna Kowalski tightened a coupler, checked the pressure readout, and answered without drama. Because your rulers are on trial. Your children are not. The phrase spread through local channels faster than official bulletins. Corey's tribunal convened under neutral charter on the 12th day, in a hall deliberately plain so architecture could not imply rank. Elena attended in person. Marcus appeared by secure projection from Fleet Command. Leora watched from the observer gallery beside LUM scholars and Thel legal apprentices, no longer the silent child on a bench, but a recognized technical witness with her derivations entered into permanent case record. The panel delivered sentence after public review and cross-examination. Permanent cognitive dampening to prevent reconstitution of coercive link command authority. Life detention under rotating neutral custody. No eligibility for political restoration. Sentence execution immediate and witnessed. Corey tried for final grandeur and found none available. The dampening field engaged. His filaments dimmed. He sat, suddenly ordinary, while clerks read confirmation codes into the record and sealed the file as irrevocable. Every external call that had once carried fear received closure. Thel hospitals confirmed full stock recovery and published mortality reductions. LUM arbitration committees completed open replication audits and certified Hayes protocol as stable under mixed cognition load. PAX insurers released frozen payouts under the Coalition Indemnity Fund, then dissolved emergency measures once traffic normalized. Sauron's habitat dependency file remained public, cited in both prosecution and humanitarian review. Proof that one commander's breach of doctrine had saved civilians his own regime had considered expendable. 5 years later, Helix Junction looked different before anyone said a word about politics. The old Nexari elevated crescent in council chamber had been rebuilt as a level technical form where no species sat above another. Gate licensing kiosks that once demanded psychic compliance now displayed open convergence accords in plain language. Freight crews from frontier worlds and core academies trained on identical simulation blocks labeled Hayes Protocol. Revision history intact, including Lyora's dry note about random seeds lying to flatter doctrine. Leora Hayes, taller now and still carrying ink stains on the side of her hand during long sessions, sat at the ethics and release board with Elena, Becker, one LUM mathematician, one Nexari cooperative delegate, and a rotating seat for frontier systems. The day's hearing concerned a new gravitic optimization package with dual-use risk. A young researcher argued for immediate full release. An older security officer argued for classification. Leora listened, then spoke in the measured cadence she had learned from watching adults try to turn certainty into policy. Open science prevented monopoly. Controlled sequencing prevented panic. The trade-off is not openness versus safety. The framework is verification, timing, and equal access. We release Core Math now, publish stress tests with it, and stage high-energy implementation tools after civilian operators complete training. No species gets a private shortcut. The vote passed unanimously. Marcus had retired from active fleet command and still refused ceremonial titles beyond advisor, but he returned to Helix for the Accord anniversary and stood with Sauron on an observation deck overlooking lanes that no one power could close anymore. Sauron wore no military insignia. The restructured Nexari polity had ratified demilitarization, abolished oligarchic link privilege, and converted former command schools into cooperative navigation institutes monitored by treaty inspectors from 7 species. The process had been uneven, contested, and sometimes bitter, yet stable. Sauron watched a convoy of mixed hull designs pass through a corridor his people once sold by threat. "We spent centuries defining intelligence as resemblance to ourselves," he said. "It was a convenient theology." Marcus folded his hands behind his back. "Most bad systems are convenient for someone. You could have destroyed us when Helix broke. We destroyed what needed ending." In the chamber that afternoon, the Open Convergence Accords renewal concluded with signatures from every major bloc and most minor ones, including those that had once paid tariff chains in silence. The final clause designated humanity guarantor state for anti-coercion transit law, with enforcement shared through multilateral review rather than unilateral command. It was not empire. It was responsibility, audited and contested in daylight. As delegates dispersed, the Kith representative, who had looked at Lior with pity years earlier, paused beside Elena. "I misjudged your observer, child," he said. Elena allowed herself the smallest smile. "Many did." He inclined his head toward the busy technical forum, where students from half the galaxy argued over convergence variants in 3 languages and 1 symbolic code. Not anymore. Night cycle settled over Helix in muted steel and amber. Civilian liners, medical ships, and cargo trains moved through open lanes under shared protocols, their transponders carrying no hidden tribute fields. In a classroom ring overlooking the junction, an instructor wrote the first line of the old impossible problem, and then, beneath it, the first line of the proof that ended a monopoly. The students leaned forward, curious rather than afraid, while beyond the glass, the traffic of a freer galaxy kept flowing.